Do you want your children to thrive, be confident, and be good people in the school you send them to? This episode is all about school choice with Caleb Brown on Spirit Inspire, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Inspire. I'm your host today, John Soul, and joined with me is my co-host, Chuck Obichefu.
Hey, everyone.
And we've kind of got a new setup here, so the table's been reoriented. We're trying it out. If it is terrible, let us know in the comments, and we'll change it back. But regardless, we're trying to do the Matt Fradd / Joe Rogan style of interviews, and this is our first time. And to do so, we're going to introduce a guest named Caleb Brown. He's a parent in Shelby County and a parent volunteer for the Kentucky School Choice Coalition. So we're kind of discussing school choice and what that really is and what we should be thinking about as far as voting. It's not a political conversation as much as it is a spiritual and practical conversation about what's needed for families and for parents and for children. So, Caleb, thank you for being here.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a great gift. So to kind of get people to know you a little bit, we didn't want to start right off on the main topic. We'll kind of lead to that, of course, as we mentioned before the show, but kind of let people get to know you. So, like, where do you come from? Like, where were you raised? What's been your faith journey, educational background?
Well, I'll start with Kentucky. I grew up in Southwest Missouri
Sure.
for a while. Parents divorced, and then I jumped around back and forth between my parents for a while, and eventually settled with my mom in Western Kentucky. I went to Callaway County High School. Go Lakers. And then came to the University of Louisville, was a student there and a journalist for years in Louisville. Worked for WHAS Radio, Snitch. You guys are probably too young to remember Snitch. And briefly WLKY. I wrote for Leo and
oh, very cool. So you wrote, like, were you on camera or just writer or producer?
I did for briefly was technically a freelance reporter for WLKY, but did a lot of stuff in Frankfurt for them and in Louisville. Didn't really like television reporting.
Sure.
Prefer print and radio, but then I worked for the Bluegrass Institute for a while here in Kentucky, which is Kentucky's free market think tank. And then moved to Washington, D.C. for about 10 years doing podcasting and in the policy realm. And now I live in Shelbyville with my wife and 3 kids. And our kids go to Corpus Christi Classical Academy in Shelbyville.
Right?
In Shelbyville.
Yeah.
And, being able to see what a small school that is very mission-driven can do with fairly limited resources, and they're in it to win it. And that's really what I think I would like all parents to be able to experience, that relationship of trust between a school or any learning environment really and themselves, to trust that this school is really going to do its absolute best for my kids and is in it for my kids' education.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Corpus Christi is similar to like Immaculata and Holy Angels as far as the classical education, Highlands Latin School. I mean, they're very, very mission-driven, and they're tight-knit community, right? So how has that inspired you on your journey? Like, how has that affected your own faith, your own awareness as a parent, as a head of the household, as a father? How do you really how do you operate, like, because of that?
So, well, I want to clarify the question. Sure. What, when you say that?
So when it comes to like Corpus Christi, like how has that school and environment like shaped you in this?
Well, so I will say this. So before I was a father,
sure,
I thought I was pro educational freedom, pro parental empowerment in education, and then I became a dad, and I realized, I didn't really know that I could become a rabid parental empowerment, school choice person until I have these
100 times more
these tiny people looking to me for guidance in their lives.
Yeah.
And so that's a role that I really cherish, being able to help guide my kids. And we were very lucky that Corpus Christi, the head of school, Kathy Fader, is a local hero in this area, and seeing her operate and seeing how much energy she gives to this enterprise, and it's all a part of her faith to deliver this to kids. That's her job. She takes a great deal of joy in it, and she in particular is a very, I think, inspiring person, because she's such a great booster for the kids. She's a great spokesman for the school. She's a great manager, and does it all on really a shoestring. And it's really been great. It's been very inspiring to me as somebody who advocates in this area to see a group of people who are so dedicated, delivering this. It's a Montessori classical Catholic school, and we're not even Catholic, so it's really inspiring to see what that school is able to accomplish. On behalf of kids.
They just kind of exude evangelization in some way. Just it draws you into the heart of their own faith, their own understanding of Christ and the church, but also life and what it means to be human and how to interact as family members and in a community.
Well, it's like, so I'm a Quaker.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
And so one of the slogans, every faith group has their slogans, and one of them is, what if your life is the only Bible somebody ever reads?
I've heard that.
And so, and to me, that's like that's an important thing. It's like, and for Quakers in particular, it is very important that every moment of every day you are living that life, that you are attempting to exude that at every moment. And that's, it's very inspiring to see how that works in practice at a place like Corpus Christi.
It stops being about yourself, right, and self-maximization, and you now have to check yourself, like, oh wow, like what if my life is the only testimony that someone will ever have of good doctrine, right?
It's a disciplining thing to think about, right?
Yeah, you want to be inviting and inspiring to people. You want to draw them in. You can't impose something. You have to propose something. So, and it's to me like a school. A school is not meant to be just this disciplinarian type environment, but it's also not meant to be just this lackadaisical do whatever you want. I mean, for you, like, what would be the essence of a good school?
Well, I think the purpose of education, and school and education aren't necessarily the same thing. You can be schooled for many, many years and not get an education, and you can get an education and never attend a school.
Is being schooled like a euphemism for being institutionalized, maybe?
Well, it could be.
In some ways.
It could be. I mean, you were being trained in some way, but I mean, the bottom line for me, for my kids, is that I want them to be confident, competent adults. I'm not raising children, I'm raising adults. And so far, at least, I think Corpus Christi has really given them that opportunity, has really helped them, as something that Kathy, the head of school at Corpus Christi, says. The school is a partner in education of your kids.
Partner.
And that, and they are at all times very respectful of the fact that the parent is the primary educator of children. And so to have that relationship of trust where my wife and I are working, the kids are off at school, to be able to trust that they're going to teach them in a way that I support fully. That's, to me, that's the gold standard for having a school for your kids, is that you have this relationship of trust. And for so many parents in Kentucky, for whom their assigned public school is the only option they have. Now, they can be, it's a lot is driven by wealth. A lot is driven by the fact that the parents have to work, which is also driven by wealth. And whether or not they trust the school that they send their kids to, it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
They have to send them somewhere, and if they can't afford to send them to a school that can earn their trust,
Right, if they don't have the money,
and if the locally assigned public school that they're sending their kids to, if that school earns their trust, that's kind of a bonus. But it's not the thing that is decisive.
Do you think that, like, generally in America today, there's, I guess the way it's that the public education school system has evolved is that it really is just because you now have dual income homes, if they are dual income homes and they have to be dual income homes, that school is more essentially subsidized childcare rather than,
First of all, I have in the past few years, I want to reiterate, in the past few years, I have come to have enormous respect for teachers because they have to deal with my children in particular. And so I don't want to poo-poo teachers. Because teachers will outwork any one of us in this room.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And to the extent that they are given that freedom to, apply their professional training to helping kids reach new heights, to have those aha moments in their head.
Oh, it's incredible.
That's part of that's part of the compensation.
Right.
Right. If you're a teacher and you get to really inspire and help kids develop themselves as learners, like, that's part of the compensation. And I think for a lot of teachers, the mandates, the top-down structure of a lot of the schooling that we have, particularly in Kentucky, doesn't let teachers operate to their fullest potential to help those kids achieve those heights. And so I have enormous sympathy for teachers, especially in this public system, where administrators may or may not have their backs,
right,
when it comes to delivering education or assuring order within a classroom. But to say that it's subsidized, in some cases is subsidized childcare, I don't think that's totally unreasonable. I think it makes me. I want to make sure that teachers are getting their due.
Absolutely.
In terms of, like, being able to deliver that education. But the way the system is structured, at the end of the day, for some parents, I think that's a reasonable assessment.
Yeah, and I don't think it's meant to be negative on teachers at all.
Because it's a prioritization issue.
Right.
Because of the way administration works.
Yeah. Well, when I was, I taught in 40 different schools, public and private, throughout the area, giving talks on chastity, healthy relationships, marriage, sexuality, things like that. And not easy going into 8th and 9th grade classrooms with that message. But the things that I've witnessed were very obviously different in every environment. But the schools, public schools specifically, you're exactly right. The teachers often didn't feel like the administration had their back. They felt like their hands were tied. They felt like the parents weren't invested. I had heard that during COVID, like 10,000 students in Jefferson County were just lost in the system because they had one phone number that went to one parent's cell phone that had a voicemail that wasn't even set up. And so you couldn't even leave a message, and they never called back or texted back. So these kids were completely lost. They may have never gone back to school. And you wonder, like, that is the state of the family today in some ways, right? Not in all ways, not every school. So, like, subsidized childcare, glorified babysitting, whatever you call it, like, as a youth minister, before I was speaking, just in my 3 parishes in my region, I faced that too. Right? Like, we would have after-school youth group, but the parents would sit in their car on their phones, if they were even there, and they didn't even care what I was doing with them. It was like glorified babysitting. And I was just a youth minister. I can't imagine what teachers feel. And I think that's what we're kind of getting at. How do teachers feel about this situation and the weight that they're bearing?
Yeah, I can't speak for any teachers, but I can say, so when we moved to Shelbyville, it was during the pandemic.
Oh,
we had somebody who had become a friend. She was a public school teacher, summer off, And, her story from March through May of COVID, teaching in that environment where she had, I believe, second grade kids on essentially a Zoom call for much of the day, she couldn't handle it. And I mean, it couldn't. I say that it's just a sort of an insane arrangement to expect second graders to be in that environment.
It's a nightmare.
And she started her own pre-K. She started her own pre-K school in Shelbyville.
Wow.
And our daughter was her first student. And so we helped her get a bunch of, we did a ton of advertising for her. She filled up that classroom and has never looked back. And when our kids were doing their little testing to go to Corpus Christi to find out whether or not where they would place, essentially what their placement looked like, Kathy Fader, who I've talked about a couple of times here because she is such a dynamic and wonderful person. She said, I want to meet this Miss Debbie that your kids have been going to, because my kids were writing well. They had a lot of key skills that you would want most kindergartners to have. And so we were very heartened by our experience with helping a teacher leave the system and strike out on her own to help kids develop. And I think there are a lot of teachers out there who have that entrepreneurial spirit, mm-hmm. and without a robust, decentralized school choice program in Kentucky, which is, by the way, almost entirely unconstitutional according to our current state constitution. I think it would be, there are so many teachers out there who I think have that entrepreneurial spirit and have that professionalism to be able to strike out on their own and really deliver a valuable service to kids and families.
What do you think for folks that they're detractors of kind of that approach, the decentralized approach, the voucher approach? Okay. Like, they have many qualms about it, right? Like, why aren't we putting more money in public schools? Isn't that the solution rather than, which I guess is valid to an extent, but why? But why is that not the best option given the circumstances? Maybe just focusing on Kentucky and Kentucky's own issues, and we can extrapolate that out.
Well, for a lot of kids, their assigned public school might be the best option. And maybe they do have that relationship of trust with that school, and they really, their kids come home and they see that progress that they want to see.
I wonder what the percentage, though, of that is compared to not.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there are a lot of people who could be unhappy with a school that's doing a great job. I think a lot of parents can be happy with a school that's doing a terrible job. But at the end of the day, parents ought to be the ones making the most critical decision about a child's education.
No one can. They can't gainsay that. Like, do you want to have the do you want to be the focal point for advancing your child's education or not? Right? Like, who would say?
Yeah. And so, to the extent that, there's no good proxy for having a parent in your home who is observing a child and seeing, how well are they learning? How well are they advancing? What difficulties are they having? Both academic and emotional, right? What are the things that we can do to improve that situation? For so many parents right now, in the current status quo, top-down schooling system that we have in Kentucky, it doesn't matter what parents discover about their child's. They can fill out paperwork. They can ask a school to provide their child with some special services. But if there's no power for that parent to walk away and easily put that child in a more trustworthy learning environment, if that's not an option, the incentives are kind of not really there for that school to step up. Right? If I walk into a grocery store and they don't have exactly what I want, I can walk out of there ask no
Go to a
questions.
different one.
Go to a different one. Never go back to that other one. I don't have to explain myself. But the system that we have in education is the system already has all the money. And if you don't trust that particular learning environment to deliver for your kids,
You're stuck.
what are you going to do? And for I don't know what the percentage of students who would immediately go to some other option would be, but it's not zero. And as long as there are kids who need something else, and a school that either is not equipped or not that interested in really going above and beyond to help that kid achieve, you're just you're stuck.
Yeah, it's interesting that we have a culture built on materialism in the sense of like, you can choose whatever you want to buy and where you want to buy it. But when it comes to like the spiritual, virtuous, educational, like intangible messaging, truth, worldview that we're trying to instill within the hearts of the inner world of people, that's when you don't have options. That's when you don't have freedom.
Yeah,
right?
well, that's part of it's a big part of it, right? So Corpus Christi is a Catholic school, and if my kids decide they want to be Catholic, that's fine by me.
That's good openness.
And so, it being able to instill your values in your child, that's part of education. And to the extent that we have secular schools that are government-run schools, you don't get to say that, we don't teach values, or we avoid these issues over here. It's like, no, values are taught.
Right.
But what happens?
They are. It's like the Great Rush song. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice, right?
Yes.
Values are communicated, and whether or not they align with yours, for the place that you are sending your own children, that's really important. That
It's like
those values align.
It's like what happened in Glendale, California. The parents kind of, bum rushed the school board there because they found out, what was being purveyed in the public schools in the Glendale, California school district. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
I've not heard about it. No.
Yeah. Like a couple years ago, there was a big kerfuffle in Glendale, California, because they were pushing certain values right within the school system that a lot of the constituent parents there within the school district weren't very big fans of. Glendale, California has a large Persian population. I think that's where they filmed The Shaws of Sunset. It's like I don't follow Bravo TV, but you know what I mean.
I do not.
Yeah, but they and then the same thing happened in Virginia. I think that's why Glenn Youngkin won, right? With parents, because I think the previous governor was like, no, parents don't get to decide what.
Right, that was it. Yeah, that was a key debate moment.
Yeah,
in the Virginia debate, and I think there is a strain. I don't think most teachers hold this in their hearts, but there is a view that, look, you're sending your kid to government schools. We're going to teach them what the government needs them to know. And I'm like,
Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Are those the values?
Are those the values?
It's kind of a render unto Caesar moment, right?
Yeah.
It's what I'm interested in is giving my kids the moral, ethical, spiritual foundation for them to be adults who will make this planet a better place to live.
What's the history of this school choice debate? Like, I just don't understand why this is even a debate. It should be obvious that parents should be responsible and have the freedom to send their child to whatever school they want, but something went wrong to get us to this point. What's that history?
Well, I'm not an expert on
or a general idea
on
of it, right?
But
sure.
I will say that the great Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman was somebody who basically argued and said, look, we like competition on the margins. We like people to have choices in markets. That's how we get a lot of improvements, how we get a lot of innovation, and that's how we meet our material needs, is that we have a market-based system. And to the extent that the state is responsible for funding educations, the people who are making the decision about what those educations are, by and large, ought to be parents. And there are some bad parents out there, but for the good parents who would relish the opportunity to be able to weigh the costs and benefits of this education versus that education and really understand more about what these various options are going to deliver for their kids, they're ready to take up that opportunity. And in Kentucky, just for so long, that opportunity's never been presented.
A lot of people, like I literally was just talking to someone yesterday. I didn't even know this would be the subject of the conversation, but the way they framed it was, why should I pay for someone who was already going to go to private school to have funds to go to private school?
So that's an interesting point, and that's why I don't
know if that's even based in.
I don't dismiss that out of hand. Now, first of all, the amendment that's on everybody's ballots, Amendment 2 in Kentucky, it might be on the back of your ballot actually, is
remember to turn it around.
Would remove restrictions that are in Kentucky's Constitution to allow the legislature to provide for children's educations outside the system of common schools. Now, the common schools, as a constitutional language, refers to public schools. And so for a very long time, that system has sort of built walls around that funding and has basically said, look, if you're going to fund education, it's got to go through us. If you're going to pay for any K-12 education, it's got to go through us. And so this would change that to allow lawmakers to create the kinds of choice programs that empower parents that exist in 48 other states. Kentucky and North Dakota are the only two states that have essentially zero opportunities to provide for education outside of the traditional assigned public school model.
So this isn't like novel.
No, this has been going on for decades.
So would you say this is favorable that it's going to pass? Or not?
Has
this ever been on the ballot before?
No, no.
Wow.
No.
So this is a very significant moment in the history of Kentucky.
To your point, the point was that the one concern, and I think it is a valid concern, that to the extent that some kids were already going to go to a private school, why should the state essentially reimburse them for that provision? And my response to that is, every child that is not as a school-age child who is being homeschooled or is attending a private school or some hybrid or just gets tutoring, or the parents they're especially smart kids and they're in 10th grade, but they're in college full time. That happens.
Yeah.
And those parents are paying twice for one education.
Property taxes.
So they're paying their income tax. Half of the state budget goes to education. They're paying property taxes, which a large fraction of which goes to support the local public schools. They're paying federal taxes, which gives grants to local schooling. They have a water bill, part of the water bill, and water bill goes to local public schools.
Wow.
So to that
do you think most people know that?
Oh, it's on the bill.
I mean, but like the breakdown.
Oh, no,
the breakdown of allocation.
Probably not. No. And so the state, through the SEEK formula, allocates about $4,200. I'm not 100% sure on the exact number, but it's about $4,200 per student that goes directly to the school system to educate that child. And so when you take your child out of the public school, no matter what you do, you just save taxpayers $4,000 a year.
Well, that should be incentive enough.
Because that money is no longer allocated.
Huh.
Now, do you get it back in order to provide for the education that you are now not consuming from the state? No, absolutely not.
Is it like, what do you call it? Is it a paid for, so the people that are pushing the amendment, they have a way that they've formulated it's going to be funded based off of existing.
So the amendment doesn't create any kind of school choice program.
Okay.
The amendment just clears the way for lawmakers to create a school choice program. Now, if you want to, and this goes again back to your question about funding and subsidizing wealthy people, which I don't really want to do. I don't want to subsidize wealthy people, and we're all if we don't pay our taxes, we go to jail. That is well understood.
Right.
But if you want something that I think is likely to be a school choice program in the future, we can look at 2021. The General Assembly passed a first in the nation tax credit funded education savings account. Now it was a very small program, $25 million in total benefits to young people in, I think, 8 or 9 counties in the state, the most populous counties in the state. And essentially, that would have allowed donors to give money to organizations that would then distribute scholarships only to people of moderate and lower income to send their kids to a different school. The wealthiest Kentuckians would receive zero benefits directly from that program.
That's an example of
That's something that did pass the legislature.
But that was almost
and was thrown out by the courts, which is why we're having this debate right now.
Oh,
wow.
Okay. I was wondering if that was just a preliminary sign that this was going to pass. No. So it's what caused the need for this to be voted on.
It's what the state Supreme Court, in a ruling that I think was frankly bizarre, threw that program out entirely. The Education Opportunity Account program, they threw it out, and
based off purely unconstitutional.
On constitutional grounds, which I think was again bizarre the way that they interpreted it, because that piece of legislation was written specifically to comply with our weird, highly restrictive state constitution that prevents parents from making those important choices for their kids.
You know, it's interesting. I think of Kentucky as like a battleground state even today. It's not just Civil War or slavery. It has nothing to do with that as much as it has to do with just the spiritual nature of how families are raised, how families interact, how communities are built. Like there are things that seem to be holding Kentucky back in so many different ways, like spiritual strongholds, and yet I'm seeing things breaking loose more and more. So I have high hopes for this, but I can't predict it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know. There are a couple of different strains that are at work going both directions on this amendment fight. One is just parents who say, look, my local public school, I tried to get an IEP, which is like an individualized program for a child's education. I tried to get an IEP because my son he's dyslexic, or he has some sort of learning disability or emotional difficulties, things like that. I tried to get some help for him and just didn't get the help I wanted. But there's no other place for me to go. I can't afford to go somewhere else to help my child. And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of administrators, boards of education, superintendents who are like, this will devastate our public schools. Now, I don't believe that, because to the extent that a local public school is delivering the goods for young people, parents aren't going to go anywhere.
Right. Yeah, all it's going to do in my mind is reveal the really bad schools and get them out of there.
Yeah, to the extent that the school doesn't have any parents' trust, and
they deserve to close.
And we craft a program that allows parents to, put the money in the backpack. the kid goes to the school that meets that family's needs the best.
Including like transportation and stuff like that.
Any number of things. So the education opportunity accounts that were thrown out by the Supreme Court in late 2022, that program could have, that money, that $25 million, to the extent it was distributed to individual families, could have been used for transportation, for tutoring, for music lessons, for tuition, of course, but a wide variety of things so that parents can really help craft the programs to get their kid the best education they can.
Was there a reason that they gave?
So this is getting a little bit into the policy weeds here, but I'm happy to do it. The state Supreme Court essentially said, well, it's a tax credit, and as a matter of federal law, a tax credit is not government money. Right? Now, why is that? Because the money never enters the government coffers. And so the government doesn't get to tell us exactly how to spend our money.
That's the real issue. It's a power thing.
It's not under the article, the taxing power.
Right. They can't. If the federal government instituted a 100% tax and then gave us all deductions and then said, oh, by the way, all of that money that we gave you back as a deduction or a tax credit, we get to tell you how to spend it now. And so, but we don't do that. We don't do that in the United States, but except in this one case in Kentucky, where they said, look, that tax credit money would have been government money. Therefore, it is government money. Therefore, you cannot use it to deliver this education benefit to these young people.
This sadly is like a fight between the government versus families in that way. It feels like in that sense.
It feels that way. And so just for a lot of families who aren't getting the help they need, aren't being listened to, and frankly don't feel empowered to be the best parents they can be, they're just kind of stuck right now.
What would like hypothetically, right? Just for those people who are teetering on like doomsayers for what this means, is there a scenario in which this amendment would open the door to like the disemboweling, if you will, of public schools?
So that these are great questions.
Like
these are the questions I hear a lot.
Excellent.
So I will say that. Like I said earlier, 48 states deliver parents more options than Kentucky does, and no school system has been obliterated the way that the detractors of Amendment 2 have said will happen in Kentucky. I think there's a lot of legitimate distrust of the General Assembly to do this with care and precision, and I respect that lawmakers are not the smartest among us. And,
no comment.
No, that's fine. I'll comment for you.
He's a lawyer, so
so you know lawmakers then.
No comment.
You've read the statutes that these people have written.
Actually, but that's why I'm wearing. That's why I'm. You know, there have to be like I guess my question would be like, there have to be protections that are put around, like I guess, shoring up the common schools in the wake of this amendment.
Yeah. So what this amendment would not release the legislature from its constitutional obligation to provide an efficient system of common schools, and it would not allow them out of the obligation of making sure that kids that remain in the public school system, which would be the vast majority of kids, it doesn't release them from the obligation of making sure that those educations that are being provided are adequately funded. If you can think of it as like a pressure valve on demand for something extra for those kids who need it. You know, kids are different. The kids are wild. My 3 kids are wildly different people, and for some of them, maybe a traditional public school experience might be ideal. I don't know that, and I know that there are a lot of kids who are currently in the public school system for whom that experience is not ideal.
See,
and to the extent that we're making decisions on behalf of those children, we have to trust their parents to be the people to make those decisions, because nobody loves that kid more. And to the extent that we trust parents to make that decision, we need to empower them to play that decisive role, whether they can afford it currently or not.
I've heard, and if I feel free to fact check me, maybe you can fact check me on this, that the fastest growing adopters of homeschooling in the United States are people of color, African Americans.
Yes. So let's drill down on why that might be. Black Americans are typically lower income than white Americans. They typically live in areas with lower
proportional.
Yeah. They typically live in areas with relatively lower property values, which is where a lot of school funding comes from. And so, to the extent that we have a public system that is not all of which, but a large chunk of which is funded by local property taxes, those schools can be some of the worst funded.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to the extent that there is demand for different options for parents, lower income and minority families are broadly support school choice policies more than everybody else, because they understand the consequences.
So do you think the busing system might be a factor here in the resistance to this situation? I don't know much about that. I just know that was one of the problems from
what do you mean?
The 1970s in the Jefferson County public school system, which has a huge influence on the entire state of Kentucky.
Right. So this has like a long Supreme Court and constitutional history, because busing has been before the U.S. Supreme Court. Louisville's busing has been before the U.S. Supreme Court maybe twice. I'm not an expert on that.
I just wonder if it's a factor in the resistance here.
It could be. It could be a factor. I think that when Marty Polio presided over the worst busing disaster in probably the history of the Commonwealth, save the Carrollton bus crash, he. As far as I can tell, he wasn't at work that day. He was taking his daughter to college on the day of that meltdown, and then became very indignant that somebody dared ask him about that fact. And I just thought, man, I don't think you're in it to win it here. I don't think you're here to serve these students. You want to take your daughter to college, that's fine, but don't pretend like you're still on the job.
Yeah. But
bottom line is for students in Jefferson County in particular, Jefferson County Public Schools has a budget that's more than $2 billion a year. That's more than the city of Louisville's budget, as I understand it.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
And there is no opportunity for young people to a lot of families to choose anything but their assigned public school. They tried to implement a choice zone, which is a misnomer. It's not a choice zone. You get to just rank order your preference, and then they decide based on capacity whether or not you get your choice. That's not choice. It's not choice when you just rank order your preferences and you get what you get. That's not choice at all.
No.
That is you expressing your preferences and them making the decision. And so I think they've tried to make it look like it's Potemkin choice, right? They've introduced a program that looks like it's kind of choice, but isn't. And I think for a lot of parents, a lot of families have really seen through that and realized that, a busing disaster that closed school for 2 weeks is just not. However the system is designed, there's very little accountability for these public sector actors. To my knowledge, nobody got fired after that busing disaster. School was closed for approximately 2 weeks. And if more parents had an option to walk away from that system, well, I know that a lot of them would take it.
Yeah.
John was making the case for, where do values fit in to this? And I'm curious, I guess both of you guys, do you think that which agenda? I won't say agenda. Which theme do you think is at the forefront of this? Is it values at the expense of administration, or administration at the expense, or administration should be subject to the values of parents in general? Because, or maybe even a wild card option, is it that no one necessarily trusts the values that the state has been in?
I think for parents, I think there are a wide variety of reasons that they want school choice. For some, it's, I want my kid to have that religious education. I want them to be have the same kind of spirituality that I was raised in. Fine. For some parents, it's I want my kids to be engineers or doctors or lawyers or contribute to society, or musicians, or contribute to society. And
so I want to pick a specific school for that purpose.
Yeah, and whatever their academic pursuits are for their kids, that's like, this is our focus. This is something we really care about. For other parents, it might be I don't want my kid to be bullied. I want my kid to be especially safe. I don't want to send my kid to a school that has metal detectors.
Right.
Or I want my kid to be in a learning environment that is free of drugs. And for other parents, it's just that trust. That I don't have a lot of trust in the system as it is currently constituted to deliver for me and my family. And some parents are probably just offended that they're not being listened to.
Well, also,
or some combination of all of those things.
Yeah, and also part of the problem is that parents are so overworked because they both mom and dad have to have 2 full-time jobs, likely, to even afford to pay for their own housing and food, let alone a school that they definitely can't afford. So it's just and not just because of inflation, it's more just the system in place. I mean, 250 years ago, mom and dad were both working on the family farm and they raised their children together. But as soon as the Industrial Revolution took on, I mean, it's like fathers went out of the home. And as soon as the wars happened, mothers left the home. And now they're both working. And that's just the expectation because of the paradigm that we've created over the last 50 to 100 years. And that's unsustainable long term. And so childcare continues to get more expensive and more demanding. And it feels like it's impossible to fix this system gradually without some eventual and inevitable collapse in some ways. And it makes people, I think, on edge, and it increases tension and stress. But my hope is that this could actually relieve that tension. And even if there's some kind of collapse that people feel, I don't think it's as cataclysmic or apocalyptic as some people make it seem. You know,
people who have been without choice for so long have forgotten the power that comes. May have forgotten the power that comes with choice.
The top-down system that we have right now really disempowers parents to play that most critical role. It essentially tells them, your preferences don't matter. We got this. And for a lot of kids, they in fact do not got this.
Right. The parents want to instill a good moral compass in their children, but when the schools tie their hands or the government ties their hands, it makes it seem impossible. But I mean, isn't that the whole purpose of education, to instill virtue in the lives of young people?
That's one purpose, and a lot of parents, I think especially Catholic parents, really value that. I value that. I want my children to be good, moral stewards of their place on this earth. And more than that, I want them to be competent to think clearly about how the world works, how it ought to work, and to be cheerful, and to be kind. And that's on me. That is on me to make those decisions to help my kids have that in their lives, to have that grounding. But for a lot of parents, those kids are away from them for 8 to 10 hours a day. I would think that a parent's trust in the place where they're sending those kids is of utmost importance.
You would hope.
But to the extent that those parents don't have choices about where they get to send their kids, where they can't look those school administrators in the eye and shake their hand and say you're doing a good job, if that handshake, if that trust is irrelevant, we're failing families, we're failing kids if trust in schooling, trust in that school is irrelevant.
I mean, would you say that another factor here is also the breakdown of the family? We have mothers and fathers raising their children together, but in many households, it's not even the case. You have single parent homes and or abusive homes in those ways that are kids would rather be at school than at home because of the situations that they may be facing. How do we handle that? Because that's an added complexity.
That is above my pay grade. But I will say my parents were divorced when I was a kid. I lived in public housing when I was a kid, and I bounced back and forth between my parents' households when I was a kid. I was very fortunate to attend schools that I think served me pretty well. Both my parents are pretty bright, so I appreciate the fact that they were able to teach me in their off hours. But there's, since having 3 kids, I gotta say there's no one I have more sympathy for than a single mom.
Yeah.
Because I know I couldn't do what my wife and I are barely able to accomplish together. I know I couldn't do that.
We just had our first last month, and I'm like, I don't even understand how I live without sleep now. And that's basically my life. I'm sure it'll get better, but maybe it won't. It probably will get worse, right? But
it won't get better. It will get different.
It'll get different, right.
Embrace
but I
the
can imagine, and my wife Crystal has said, I couldn't do this without you, John. And I couldn't do it without her. I don't imagine it.
Of course not.
But how do people do it? That's the courageous.
I don't know.
Amazes
and
me.
There are a lot of people who are just going to accept what they're given. And I think that to the extent that we have a system that we've decided to fund education primarily through state and local governments and a little bit from the feds, to the extent that we have a system like that, putting parents in charge of the time, place, and manner of a child's education, it's critical. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that we can do that, I think we give parents a lot of hope for the future, because we want our children to have a better life than we did. We want our children to be better people than we are, quite frankly. And we do our best to try to instill them with values, with education, with tools in their minds to help them deal with adversity. And if parents aren't the people that we are giving that task to and empowering them with resources to accomplish that task, I really feel like we're just doing a bad job.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the argument that, which you tell me how much mileage it has? There are some parents that are better positioned to exercise choice than others.
Right. What about?
A voucher in one parent's hands is of greater utility than in another parent's hands. Maybe the single mother who, what would she do with a voucher? Maybe it's not enough for transportation. Maybe it's not enough for this. Okay, I can send them to this school, but that's, I'm in a district that's not conveniently close enough to the one that I would choose, and I don't have enough money via the voucher. Right. But this other family might be, and maybe they were a family I was going to choose it anyways. They just needed the extra push and the extra. As I'm making sense.
Yeah, there are multiple sides to this. So one is that, let's say we decide that we're going to empower this single mom with a pile of money, and say, here's X dollars. do your best with it. If you want to go back to your normal assigned public school, that's fine. To the extent that she has that in her back pocket, she can say, well, I trust my local public school. They do a good job. It'll be fine. But just the process, the mental model of deciding, well, I might as well look around.
Oh, so
that is a huge difference right there.
So
just the notion that you might want to look elsewhere, that you might possibly look elsewhere, is a huge mental shift.
So you could choose to reinvest, like hypothetically, no matter like whatever way it manifests, you could choose to take that money and be like, oh, I'm going to become like a booster for this public school that we're already in a district, or something like that.
The funds, to be clear, would be provided specifically for the education of their own child.
Okay.
And so if you send your kid to the assigned public school, that money then just follows the child. This is broadly how school choice works. But there are a couple of other ways to look at this too. What is the impact of that on teachers who are in the system, who might have, frankly, a much better idea about how to deliver education to young people?
They can draw the dollars their way.
What does that mother having access to those funds do to the incentives faced by that teacher? If she could get, if it's, Kentucky spends $18,000 per pupil per year in the public system. On average. Some in some rural areas it's less. In Jefferson County it's dramatically more.
Of course.
And so that is a huge amount of money. And it's incredible to think that a classroom of 30 kids at $500,000 a year to operate that classroom is having real difficulties. That's not a knock on teachers. That's a knock on the system.
Yeah.
A teacher, you give a good teacher 2/3 of that money.
They come out of their own pocket for stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Teachers. Yeah. And that's the other.
Right, because there's a waste. There's waste.
There's another element here, which is, per pupil funding in Kentucky public schools has gone up 122% since CARA. Since the Kentucky Education Reform Act. Teacher salaries, this is all inflation adjusted, teacher salaries are up 8% in that time. So funding up 122%, teacher salaries up 8%. Do we trust teachers to be the professionals that they are? I do.
Yeah.
I know I know fantastic teachers. And I really want them to have the opportunity to use their professional training to help deliver the best they can for kids and for those families. And when you have a relationship of trust with someone, be it somebody who does work on your house or somebody that you are serving in a professional capacity, the fact that you are both walk away from that exchange satisfied, that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that really only a market-based system can really deliver.
Well, it just shows you the state of the values in our country. I mean, I saw a Key and Peele comedy sketch on their YouTube channel several years ago. It was called Teacher Center. It was like Sports Center, and they literally were Sports Center ESPN anchors, talking about the teacher signing a $30 million deal and how the guy's holding up a T-shirt because he was drafted, and he was like a math teacher. It's hilarious.
But they
make a point.
Yes.
They make a point, which is, my son and daughter are in the same classroom this year. They're first grade and second grade. They're in different grades, but they're in the same classroom this year.
Oh, that's cool.
And having conversations with their teacher is really heartening because obviously nobody loves those kids more than I do. But their teacher might be pretty close, and in terms of really caring about making them do well. And those kinds of teachers, to the extent that we had a robust, decentralized system where teachers and learning environments get matched. It might be an entrepreneurial setup where teacher starts a cottage school to deliver for kids, and as long as that teacher has those parents' trust, it's going to go like gangbusters. It might be, like where my kids go to school, it might be any number of other different arrangements. It might be a tutoring center. It might be, an largely outdoor school, which exists and parents love it. But the point is that the competition for those teachers' services, for the great teachers in the Commonwealth, ought to be robust. It shouldn't be based on a salary schedule. No. I mean, Shohei Ohtani, who may well be shortly in the World Series, may well be the greatest baseball player who ever lived. Right. And he's been written a check by the LA Dodgers for $700 million.
It's insane.
Now, we don't expect a lot of teachers to make that kind of money, but to the extent that there's competition for those services, administrators need to be identifying the people who are in it to win it, the people who are going to try to deliver the most value to young people, and compensate them accordingly.
Yes.
I mean, you think about what one teacher over the course of, like say a high school teacher over the course of 5 years might do for, every student that comes to her classroom in terms of educating them, and the earning potential that they may have just from being like, that's, I mean, Ohtani, that it is not the economic incentive to make sure we're putting we're empowering these people to make sure they're raising our children to be, 10 times what Ohtani is, right, in terms of what their economic draw is, because they were empowered from an educational standpoint, right? So their potential is limitless, right? We're to your point about teachers, and why are we loud like a guy that's amazing player, not originally American, right? Essentially being made a billionaire, right, by a team that's subsidized by Californian taxpayers to a certain extent.
Dang,
right?
That's a whole other issue,
right? But we can't do the same thing for our children.
It's our values.
It's our values.
Our values are based on entertainment and materialism.
Bread and
it's
services.
Not based on virtue and goodness and education steeped in a focus on excellence and love. I really think that's what it is. It's a love for power, a love for pleasure, a love for wealth and honor, not the things that really matter. Family, community.
In the case of public education within the Commonwealth, I think a big strain of this is just control.
Yeah.
And between the state itself and people whose salaries depend on a taxing power, that's part of it. They just want to maintain control of those dollars, and whether or not parents ultimately win out in the end is irrelevant. I think there are a lot of people who are fearful that they might lose their jobs if parents are given more control, but I just don't think there's anything to worry about. I think for the most part, putting parents in charge really enhances the reputation of schools and education environments in general that deliver for families. Their reputations are going to be enhanced. Teachers get beat up a lot in the culture, and I think that's really unfortunate. And I think part of the reason that is because of the design of the system that they have to work in right now.
Yes. You ever heard of Jocko Willink? He's a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
He wrote a book with a friend of his. It was all about how Navy SEALs
extreme accountability.
Yeah, something like extreme
ownership.
Ownership. It was all about decentralized command. It was all about everyone learning to be accountable for their own actions, taking responsibility for their choices, for their role in whatever decision was made. So, like, he uses an example of one of his underlings, I guess, one of the people he was in charge of. Shot at a building that they thought it was the enemy, but it was actually their own, but they didn't know that. And it technically, I mean, on paper or based on the guy's reports, it was the person that he was commanding's fault technically. But whose fault actually was it? He took responsibility no matter what. So in the same way, like, you have to have extreme ownership, but you also have to allow others to sense, because of your ownership, you instill within them a deep sense of ownership as well. So they're more likely to take responsibility for their actions and be more proactive about how they lead more effectively.
Right. And you can't send mixed signals.
Right.
You are either empowered up here. You can be empowered on paper and not be empowered up here, and it's going to be the same result as not being empowered at all.
Right, like you talked about that psychological element of a parent just knowing that they have more options.
There's something else that's better out there, and I have the means to go out and look for it. Maybe that is going to be the thing that wakes up a principal or a superintendent to say, hey, we need to step up here. We need to step up and deliver for these parents because they can walk away easily.
We no longer have a blank check that's guaranteed by statute.
Mm-hmm. And one other we talk about, like, there's the complaint from a lot of people that this is just gonna be a subsidy to the wealthy. First of all, that's possible, but only to the extent that you design a program that way. And the amendment that's on our ballots does not design a program at all. But the other thing is, to the extent that we have the status quo, public schools currently do have a stronger incentive to listen to the needs and desires of parents who already are wealthy, because those parents in their back pocket can walk away at any time. And for low-income families who are bringing perhaps identical concerns to a public school system, their incentive is not as strong to listen to those families, because those families aren't going anywhere.
Right. That's sad, right?
Captive audience.
Yeah. We just have a deep problem that will take many more years to solve, of course. And I mean, there's no utopia. You can't create the perfect system, of course. We're not advocating for that at all. We're just simply advocating for giving power back to where God always intended it to be, in the hands of mother, father, and the raising of their children. I mean, this is the natural family structure. And as the family John Paul II said famously, as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. So when you can't get that value placed within the heart of the family to raise their own children and to love one another authentically, how are you going to do anything in the rest of the community?
And for the broader public to communicate to those parents, we respect your role.
Right.
That's a critical.
Right.
That's a critical element. Yeah. Well, I don't have kids anymore. I don't have kids in the school system anymore, so I'm not worried about this. That's just the wrong attitude. Like, culturally, we need to be trusting parents and communicating our trust to those parents on a regular basis.
I don't know who said it. It was Teddy Roosevelt or Abe Lincoln. I probably misquoted, no matter who you say, but it was like something like, you don't inherit the world from your parents. You borrow it from your children. And if we can have that understanding, we're trying to raise up the next generation to make things a little bit better than what we've had before.
Right. People talk a lot about, like, being a good descendant from, the previous generations. I have a picture of my great-great-grandfather on my wall.
Being a good descendant.
The job is to be a good ancestor.
Yeah. That's exactly what we're hoping to see. And it goes down to the fundamental understanding of what it means to be a human person. We all have an origin story, and that's valuable and important. You got to know where you came from, which is why I asked about the history of school choice and where we've come from to get to this point. But you also got to know where we are now and all the complexities and brokenness and frustration there, so that we can focus on the future and have hope.
I do want to, you mentioned history. There's one element of history that I want to talk about just briefly, because I think it's really important and instructive to your audience in particular. there are state constitutional provisions in many states which have recently been diminished by Supreme Court decisions, but they're called Blaine amendments. And there was a politician named James G. Blaine from Maine.
Blaine from Maine.
But he went around arguing for states to prevent public funds from public funds, taxpayer funds, to follow students to whatever learning environment the parents might choose, explicitly on the basis of preventing the state from in any way supporting Catholic education. And the view at the time, I believe it was the late 1800s, early 1900s, the view at the time was the public schools are the Protestant schools. We all understand this, right?
Oh,
that was the
wow.
understanding. And Catholic schools are Catholic schools, that's fine, you can have them, no big deal. But no taxpayer should be expected to support parents who want their kids to go to those schools. And so states around the country set up what are called Blaine amendments. You can look up their history on Wikipedia and elsewhere. But this was explicitly an anti-Catholic project, adopting these Blaine amendments into state constitutions.
And how's that infected?
At the time, that's what it was, explicitly.
That's fascinating.
And now it's infected even Christians in general, because it's not just a anti-Catholic thing. I mean, the moment you throw off the establishment is the moment you're enter into a void of nothingness. I mean, the government is not the answer. It's not the savior. Christ is. And the president's not going to solve our problems. The governor's not going to be the answer. It's Christ in the way where we really know that as the body of Christ, as each one of us really encounters each other, we have to help people see that the problem is when we pit one person against another, when we label each other, when we persecute or try to limit one another. When in truth is, if you give everyone the facts, the truth, the goodness, the beauty of reality, trust that they will know the depths of their hearts enough to respond in the right direction. And if they choose not to, that's because of their own brokenness, their own fears of not being loved or whatever that might be limiting them. And you pray for them. That's all you can do. But at the end of the day, we have to give them that benefit of the doubt that they're a human person. They know who they really are if they're given the freedom and the choice to find that. That's the goal. So, Caleb, this has been an awesome conversation.
Hey, thank you guys. I get fired up about this.
Me too. I mean, this is great. So much, very lively. So, do you have any other closing thoughts? Because I know this is kind of airing within a couple weeks before the big vote, and I know people are anxious about this.
I think I have some friends in other states who work in this area, and I think that the fights that Kentucky is having right now and the rhetoric that Kentucky folks are hearing right now was all done 10, 20 years ago in states all throughout the United States. Every state that touches Kentucky has a private school choice program, and I believe they all have a charter school law on the books that is operational. Kentucky is like an island without school choice in our region. But I want parents to the extent, and voters to the extent that they can, just find out what organizations are operating in states around the country, and find out how's it working? Do parents like it? To me, that's the real metric. Are parents feeling better about their kids' educations? And in state after state, the answer is a resounding yes. And so I really want to see more families in Kentucky have that decisive role in getting their kids exactly what they need so that they can become confident, competent adults with good hearts.
Good hearts.
Praise God. That's right. And that's what the bishops support. That's what the Catholic Church supports. That's what Christians support. I mean, this is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned, but we had to pray. We have to pray that these strongholds will break and that the rest of the state will wake up to that. So let's pray. Everyone, thank you so much for being here and listening to this spirited conversation. Just ask that you pray for this upcoming time. This election is very critical, like every election is, of course, but just knowing that ultimately Christ is the victor. He's the one who's guiding this ship, and that no matter what happens, God is in charge, and we will continue to pray for our families and for our schools and teachers because they need it. So with that, thank you all. God bless, and we'll see you next time on another episode of Spirit and Spire.